I was engaged in an interesting little diversionary debate yesterday on Facebook, where a colleague of mine was wondering why some of the independent churches around near where he is based, in an Anglican church, were planning not to celebrate Christmas. And apparently this is quite normal amongst independent churches. They tend to favour or prioritise family time at Christmas to asking everyone to gather together for a Christmas service. And I said to him in this little discussion, yeah, it's something I've observed myself in the past. When I was young, I was a member of an independent church, and we managed to go all the way through Good Friday and Easter without even mentioning Good Friday or Easter. It was a bit of a puzzle to me, having grown up in an Anglican church, as to why this is. And it's largely because in certain independent churches, the church's year, the way we sort of process through the year from season to season or from event to event, is not so helpful to them. Rather, they will infuse their entire year. So it's not that independent churches don't talk about the cross or don't talk about the resurrection. It's just that they don't particularly focus on them at that time. It's infused through their whole teaching. It's a different style, it's a different way of being together as Christians. But I rather like the Anglican way, which is, of course, the Catholic and Orthodox way as well, of having these fixed points in the year where you particularly focus the mind and focus on the stories that we have inherited together. And one of our little traditions is that on most days of the year, if you look in the Anglican and indeed the worldwide lectionaries, we are asked to think about, commemorate, remember saints or great Christians of the past. Incidentally, you only become a saint if you're canonized by Rome. Yeah, so a saint is somebody who has been declared a saint by Rome. Anglican, what we would think of as saints, people like Edith Cavell or Elizabeth Fry, we call them divines. Yeah, that's our word for them, but it's because we don't necessarily use that same word, saint. But it means the same thing. It means this is a person whose life is worth examining, to see what we can learn from it. Just as we examined a little of the life of Saint Faith on Sunday, today we're invited to look at Wilfred and Elizabeth Fry and Edith Cavell. So let me tell you a little bit about each of them. Wilfred, or as we think his contemporaries would have called him, Wilfrith, was born in Northumbria in around the year 633. He was educated at the monastery of Lindisfarne, which some of you may have visited. But he disapproved of what he judged to be the rather Celtic insularity of the monks at Lindisfarne. Remember, at this time, the Celtic church, very much based around the north of England, in Northumbria, and of course over into Ireland and Wales and Scotland. The Celtic church had been thriving in the years since Rome had retreated from the British Isles, around 400 years after Christ. But from 597, when Augustine of Canterbury was sent on a mission from Rome by Pope Gregory to re-Romanize these Brits, they've gone a bit off the rails. We need to make sure they come back into the fold of Rome. Well, Rome had then been steadily reasserting its influence, and Wilfred's sympathies lay with Rome. He believed that Rome was the mother church, even though she had left her daughter church in the British Isles to its own devices for a couple of centuries. Wilfred journeyed to Canterbury and then to Rome. He spent 3 years at Lyon, where he was admitted as a monk, and then he was appointed abbot of Ripon. And he took with him back to Ripon the monastic system, the Roman monastic system, the Benedictine rule, the rule by which Benedictine monks lived. He played an influential role at a very important church meeting called the Synod of Whitby, which was around the year 663. So he was about 30 years old at this time. Now, this synod was called essentially to decide whether these Celtic Christians up in the north, the Anglo-Saxons, and particularly the Kingdom of Northumbria, would henceforth follow Celtic or Roman church traditions. It was a big issue. There were certain differences. The dates they celebrated Easter, some of their theology was a little bit different. Shall we bring these two together, was the debate. In other words, shall we bring the Celtic church under the control of Rome? Well, Wilfred dominated that debate. He was obviously a very articulate young man at the age of 30, and he was largely responsible, history records, for the victory of the Roman party over the Celts. Later, he was elected Bishop of York, but he went to Campania in what is modern-day France to be consecrated by 12 Frankish bishops, rather than risk any doubt of schism by being ordained by some of these Celtic ones up in the north. There were upsets. He had a lot of rows with other clerics, with Chad and with Archbishop Theodore of Canterbury. But the Roman authorities took his side, and he was eventually restored to his see at Ripon. After further disputes, he resigned the see of York and became Bishop of Hexham, and he spent his remaining years at Ripon. His gift, if we can call it such, to the English church was to make it more clearly a part of the church universal. But it has to be said, his manner and his methods were not such as to draw people close to him at a personal level. He was, by all accounts, a bit of a so-and-so. He died on this day in the year 709 and was buried in Ripon. Now, I find this period of British church history really interesting. It shows that spark of independence from other nations that, frankly, still dogs the British mindset today. We are an island nation, aren't we? And we don't take kindly to being told what to do by Johnny Foreigner in some other nation across the channel. Yeah? We never have done. Henry VIII's split with Rome was another example, and of course Brexit is the latest occasion when we have kind of pulled up the drawbridge to Europe, or to any sense of being told what to do by Europe. That's precisely the argument that was going on in Wilfred's time as well. Wilfred, or Wilfred, which is easier to say, also serves as a reminder that even the Church Universal, with its headquarters in Rome, has rarely managed to maintain a unified stance on anything. The British schism of those 600s, the Reformation, the Great Schism with the Orthodox Church at the turn of the first millennium, these are all historical events that remind us that unanimity on matters theological and ecclesiological are a rare thing indeed. Wilfred was right at the heart of one of those debates. The Catholic cardinals are having another synod, another debate, at the moment, right now, in Rome. And there are many issues up for debate there as well. In the last week or so, the bishops of the Church of England have voted to approve prayers which may be used at the blessing of same-sex marriages. That's a major shift in policy by the Church. And it's warmly welcomed by so-called progressives and liberals like me. On the other hand, those of a more conservative view are incensed by this move. Many are calling the present House of Bishops a bunch of ungodly heretics for departing from convention and standard understandings of truth. The battle over same-sex blessings and perhaps one day marriages is, frankly, but the latest big issue to get in the way of church unity. Dire predictions of schism in the Church of England are rife once again amongst the Twitterati. In the past, we've argued as a church, both in the Church of England and across with our friends in Rome, we've argued about where does authority lie? Who has the power to to say what is and isn't good theology. We've argued about slavery. We've argued about the rights of women. We've argued about the ordination of women. We've argued about the authority of Scripture. And no doubt we'll find things to argue about in the future, just as Wilfred and others did in the past. But through all these debates, the godly men and women of the past have continued to witness to God's love in the world, whatever the theologians and bishops were arguing about. I'm thinking, for example, of Elizabeth Fry. Born in Earlham in Norfolk in 1780, at the age of 20, she married Joseph Fry, a London merchant and a strict Quaker. She became a noted preacher among the Society of Friends. The appalling state of British prisons came to her notice, and she devoted much of her time to the welfare of female prisoners in Newgate. In 1820, she took part in the formation of a night shelter for the homeless in London. She travelled all over Europe in the cause of prison reform. She was a woman of strong Christian and evangelistic impulse, and that inspired her work. She died on this day in 1845. Another example of someone whose faith drove them on to great works, whatever the theologians and bishops were arguing about at the time, was Edith Cavell. Born into a clergy family at Swardston, also in Norfolk, in 1865. After life as a governess, she trained as a nurse, ending up working with the Red Cross in Belgium in 1907. On the outbreak of the First World War, she became involved in caring for the wounded on both sides of that war. She refused repatriation from occupied Belgium, and then she began smuggling British soldiers from Belgium into Holland. In 1915, she was arrested and brought to trial. Protecting those who worked with her, she was sentenced to death, and she was executed by firing squad on this day in the year 1915. She went to her death calmly, forgiving her executioners, convinced that she had been doing her duty as a Christian. A quick comparison then of those three lives, the lives of St. Wilfred, Elizabeth Fry, and Edith Cavell, leads me to conclude, and you'll be glad to know that word is coming. I'm concluding any minute now. Hang in there, you're doing well. It leads me to conclude that although Wilfred is the only canonized saint out of those three, he was possibly the least saintly of them all. By all accounts, he was a miserable and argumentative so-and-so who nobody really liked, and who spent most of his life arguing about which branch of the church was the most authentic. In comparison, Fry and Cavell poured out their lives in the service of others. They cared for the prisoner, for the homeless, and for the sick. I wonder which of these three you might want to emulate. In the spirit of today's gospel reading, I wonder whose dogged persistence we would like most to copy. Amen.